Okay, so I'll probably call this something like Uranium Drill Results and Geology Masterclass or something catchy among those lines. So you know that it's going to be an interesting discussion. Of course, I'm sitting here with the CEO of Baseload, James Sykes. It's also probably going to be a discussion that I myself will keep coming back to every now and again, but it's also going to be a conversation that will be general and impersonal in nature. So even when we say something that might seem specific, I'm sure we don't mean it. Even if we say you or something, we don't really mean you, the listener, specifically, because for all we know, you could be a uranium bear. And in that case, we just don't want to talk to you. So jokes aside, though, this video is it's just meant for entertainment and therefore should not be considered as financial advice. And you should always wear your big boy pants and make your own decisions. James, now on to you, I guess. Thank you for doing this again, sir.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I had a really good time last time.
Yeah, I can definitely say the same thing. I've been rewatching that video a couple of times, taking notes, and we're going to try and build on that in here. For anybody interested, by the way, we did a previous masterclass, not specifically on drill results and news releases, but just a general masterclass on uranium juniors. I'm going to link it somewhere. Interesting video, definitely. And today, I guess we're talking about it's more or less the same concept, uranium geology, but more specifically, how to read drill results and news releases. And before we get into it, though, James, I was thinking let's maybe start off by an overview of the different type of geological news, and maybe make like a list and a short description as to what you can expect to see from an exploration company in terms of geophysical news releases, geochemical, geochronological, or something like that, and what else may have you. So what would that list look like?
Well, when you start, it's building on that last masterclass, you start with geophysics. You want to pick your targets, and that's what a geophysical news release would do. You'd get out there and you'd highlight what you think are the most prospective targets that you want to follow up, either on the ground if you've got the outcrop or with a diamond drill. It's as simple as that. And then your next news release should be, hey, look, we're going to drill here. So you get the drills out, that gets people excited. And, hopefully you did a good job of helping people understand the geophysical news release. So that's always a tricky part. But then after drilling, then you'd want results. And one of the things that is, I guess, is unique to the uranium space is that we've got a scintillometer. So we know that uranium is emitting radiation all the time. So when we run the scintillometer on the core, or even on outcrops or something, you get radioactivity results. Now there are a number of ways to really skew that information, and it depends on your scintillometer. You can have one with a large crystal that if you've got rock of X percentage, let's say 1%, you've got scintillometer 1 that has a small crystal, so it's going to get less amount of radiation from it, and it would have a lower reading. But you've got scintillometer 2 that has a larger crystal, and it's going to read more radiation from it. So you have to be kind of leery, or you have to be cognizant of what people report, especially with scintillometer results. Now we do that at Baseload. That's something that's been done for decades now in the Athabasca basins. People put out scint results, but you always put out the type of machine that you are using, and industry standards, they should be the same. So if I'm using an RS-125 scint, it should be the same as anybody else using an RS-125, unless we've had it specifically modified, then we'd have to disclose that. But all scints are slightly different, as are gamma probes. So the reader has to be cautious about when reading radioactivity results. There's no doubt about that. But then after that, but we do that as a prelude. We do that because we're excited internally, saying, hey, look, we know we've got radiation. We've run the spectrometer on it. We know it's uranium. We just don't know what the assays are going to be. And then that's where the final results, what everybody's anticipating, are the assay results. And that's, it usually, it's either going to make everybody happy or it's going to disappoint. And such is life, eh?
So that happens before the geophysics?
No, geophysics should be first.
Geophysics always first, and then you would go around. Is that some sort of a? Maybe I have to look it up to see how it looks like, and I'll put a picture of what the thing looks like that you use to measure it. But just so you're measuring for radiation, what would that news release look like? Like, what's the first thing that I'm looking for in that news release?
Higher values better than lower values.
Higher
Just simple
value.
as
Okay.
that.
Simple.
The more radioactivity you are seeing in your core or in the results, then the better your uranium assays should be. But again, you have to be cognizant of the tool or of the piece of equipment that is being used to disseminate that information. So a handheld spectrometer will have different results than a downhole gamma probe. Downhole gamma probe would probably have higher results than the handheld scintillometer. So even though they're measuring from the same rock, you'll get two different radioactivity results, which is why in the end, it's the assay results that always trump everything.
But there's not like a better machine that you want to use. Like there's not, or like.
It depends on what people want to do. I like the industry standards, which is why we use an RS-125 as a handheld scintillometer. We use a I can't remember our probes now. We use a triple gamma probe that is industry standard as well. I know some probes out there, the 2 PGAs, they will read 6 times higher than what the triple gammas do. So if you've got 1,000 counts per second on a triple gamma, you'd have 6,000 counts per second on a 2 PGA. Yet the source rock is identical. So it's years. I've basically used almost every tool out there. I'm very familiar with a lot, and so I can understand a lot of results. But I guess that doesn't help guys who don't know the industry and who are just getting into it.
Yeah, I would say so. Exactly. So, but generally higher values better than lower values. Is there like with gold, you have the length of the intercepts when it's about drilling. Is there something like the length or the size of the intercepts of that radiation that I should be looking for?
Typically, longer is better. That's, if you've got 10,000 counts per second over 100 meters, that's obviously better than 10,000 counts per second over 1 meter.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it really depends on the grade, I guess. But that's when it comes back to the assays. So one thing that we're doing at Baseload that I haven't seen done by any other company is that we're taking the scintillometer results and we measure every 10 centimeters of core with the scintillometer. So we're treating it as a pseudo assay, and we do a composite analysis over the entire core length using a 300 count per second cutoff. And we do not include anything that's greater than 2 meters of internal dilution. So what we're trying to do is to establish a radioactivity to assay result chart for moving on in the future, so that if we can build up a correlation line, whether it's going to be straight line or whether it's going to be exponential, obviously don't know. But if we can establish that, then at least we would provide the investors and just the general public with an idea when we do put out scintillometer results, which could be 8 to 12 weeks in advance of getting assay results. People know what to expect.
And you also talk about 10,000 counts over 100 meters or something. Are there any minimal values where you say, okay, there's no way there's uranium down there if we're getting 1,000 counts or something along those lines?
I guess as far as the width goes, you'd like to see something that's greater than 3 meters. And that would really come down to a mining scenario. But if you consider that mining widths are typically 3 meters for a stope or larger, then if you can see 3 meters widths in the drill core, I think that's probably a good minimum starting point.
Okay. What about the counts? Because you said 10,000. Is that a
That's just me throwing out a number. 10,000 would be over 1% U3O8, depending on the tool that you use. With an RS-125, 10,000 counts per second would be over 1% U3O8.
Okay, so that's good. Great.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. I wasn't expecting to talk about that, so that's a good thing because it's a good overview. Because we're specifically going to be talking about drill results, and I guess to sort of make it make sense for myself, I'll give you an example of what I would do. and you tell me if that's wrong. But when there's a news release, when that drops, and if it's about drilling, and if it's about, let's say, gold, for example, because I know a lot of people know gold, and that's also something that I follow. If it's gold, the first thing that I would do, the first thing that I'm looking at out there are the grades, because of the good old saying that you have to have at least $50 to $60 worth of economical ore of minerals in a ton of ore, basically, to make it worth reading even further when there's an open pit scenario. And I think something among the lines of like 4 grams if it's an underground scenario. So could you do that for uranium, and what are those values?
Yeah, you could certainly do that for uranium.
Hmm.
And it's jurisdiction dependent though too.
Hmm.
Because what you're going to hit in Africa, what you're going to report in Africa is vastly different from an ISR type of deposit in Australia, Kazakhstan, or the States, which is vastly different from what you're going to get in the Athabasca in Saskatchewan.
Hmm.
So, like the Rossing deposit in Africa, if you got a company saying, okay, we're hitting 100 meters at 100 ppm, that's very encouraging. 100 ppm be just over 0.01% U3O8. If you had 0.1% U3O8 in Africa, that's huge. That's really good. Then you also have to look at the depth that you're hitting those results. Are you hitting them at 500 meters depth, or are you hitting them at 50 meters depth? Big difference, open pit versus underground mining scenarios. So just other things that you need to consider. With an ISR type of operation, you can hit much lower grades as well, and still looks very prominent, still looks very juicy, but you have to make sure it's an ISR. You have to make sure that it's not somebody trying to promote an unfeasible underground scenario as an ISR opportunity.
How do I do that? How do I know that?
That's the tricky part. They would have to report on the geology and say they've got aquitards that are bounding the mineralization. Otherwise, if they don't, then it's not an ISR. An aquitard is just basically thick clay layers that water would not be able to permeate through, and that's how ISR works. But if you're just hitting results and they're not saying anything about being bound by an aquitard, me personally, I would raise my eyebrows at it and kind of think, well, what's really going on here?
And
then you get into the whole Athabasca scenario. Athabasca is known for high grade. Everybody wants to see 1%, 5%, 10%. And I kind of turn my back to that and say, no, that's not needed. Not at all.
But I'm going to ask you why not. But so you don't think that 1% is sort of like a minimum for Athabasca? That, like, if you see a grade of under 1%, you personally, you would not stop reading the news release. You would need more information. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay.
Because it depends on the context of what you're hitting. If it's, when you're talking about gold and that, so I'll get into that very shortly, but with any jurisdiction in the world, it's all about economics. It's all about mineability. You can make 10 discoveries in your life. How many of those go into production? That's the be all end all. Yeah, of course, anytime you make a discovery, it's going to be very lucrative for your shareholders. They will definitely make money. But can you make more money in the end by having a deposit that will be bought out by a major who thinks it can go into development? Can you make a discovery with a deposit that goes into production on your own, therefore making more money for your shareholders? Just things like that really need to be considered. So for a great example, one of the things I've been blasted with at baseload is just, oh, your grades are too low. Your grades are too low. So no, let's put things into context. The history of the Athabasca, you had Uranium City, which has no infrastructure. All of the uranium, they mined 60 million pounds of uranium there. Sure, it's between the 50s and 80s. Everything was different back then. But the fact is, they mined 60 million pounds of uranium with no infrastructure at an average grade of basically about 0.2 to 0.25% U3O8. with most of that being underground mining and not open pit mining. You've had open pit mines in the Athabasca area with grades of 0.3% to 0.35%, where 10 million pounds came out of 3 different deposits like that. So it's doable, just if you have that open pit. So one number I just like to throw out there is let's consider the real value of 0.2%. Okay, that is 2 times the global average grade. So the global average grade of all uranium deposits is about 0.1%. It is 100 times less than McArthur River and Cigar Lake, which are both over 20%. And I think that's why everybody gets hung up on this whole, oh, you need a certain percentage, you need over 1%, you need over 5% to be mined. Not in the Athabasca, you really don't. When you're in the Athabasca itself, you need extremely high grades. You need those Cigar Lakes, you need those McArthur Rivers. If you're outside of the basin, you don't have the sandstone, your whole mining engineering changes, and you're basically just like a gold mine or a copper mine. Big difference. So throwing out there that 0.2%, if you use $60 a pound of uranium, which would be the low end of contract prices, and you compare that to gold, let's say gold's at $1,800 an ounce, the grade equivalency would be 4.6 grams per ton. So if we're talking about an open pit scenario, a 0.2% U3O8 having a gold equivalency value of 4.6 grams per ton.
Yeah, it's amazing.
That's amazing. Exactly.
You can do that. I guess you can make 4.6 grams gold work in an underground scenario as well, depending on strip and other things.
Exactly.
But that then depends on a lot of other things, like if you're on top of the mountain, if it's challenged, like a lot of other things come in play, I guess.
Lakes, is it disseminated ore throughout? Is it homogeneous throughout the entire pit body? Of course, a lot of things matter with that. Your stripping ratios, your wall inclines, so many things matter. But just throwing out there an in situ type of value, that's why 0.2 is not something that you just walk away from. Per ton basis, that's about $265 per ton.
Okay, yeah.
USD, mind you.
$65. I guess a gram of gold right now is at about $60. So if there's 4 grams, that would be a lot more.
Yeah, it's $265 per ton.
That's definitely an interesting scenario to me. At least that's, if I see that, I told you that's the first thing that I'm looking for in a gold news release. If I see 4.2 grams, that'd be interesting. But I guess they also, like in the Athabasca Basin, they hope it to be higher grade, because if you have something like Arrow with Next Gen, it's really deep and challenged and out of infrastructure and all these other things. So I guess that's why they want it to be higher grade, right?
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. Grade is king, but the economics always trump it in the end. There are so many high grade deposits in the Athabasca that have been discovered within the last 50 years that have had no movement on them. And they will probably not see the light of day for many more decades. So in the end, how much of a king is grade really?
Yeah, makes me think. But if we talk about closer or further than surface, what are those values? Is that the same as with any other mine, like sort of 100 meters is sort of the cutoff where you might make it open pit or not? Or how should I look at it when it's uranium specifically?
When it's uranium specifically, again, depends where you are. If you're outside of a sandstone basin like the Athabasca, 100 meters, those grades are huge. That's mammoth. But you could even go less than that then as well. 0.1% over 100 meters, 0.1% over 10 meters. You start looking at that and being like, hey, that's not too bad. If, is that at 400 meters depth or is that at 100 meters depth? Again, that's a big difference. If you're at 100 meters depth, you can just dig right out and then it's right there. So you're not.
That's what I was asking about, actually, the depth of where you intercepted, where you started the intercept. With gold, typically you would want it to be I guess if I remember correctly, if it's less than 100 meters deep, you can make it work open pit. But if it's more, most of the times you would start going underground. Is that true for uranium as well?
Of course, absolutely.
Okay. Just to say, it's just a mining thing. Okay, it's not a. Okay.
Yep.
Well, yeah. So you get depth. You have indeed the length of the intercepts. You sometimes some companies would use these gimmicks where they would report 500 grams of gold over an intercept of like 50 centimeters. Okay, right. That doesn't really mean a lot. Does that happen with uranium, or how should I look at it?
Of course, it happens in uranium. It happens in all commodities.
Hmm.
Is that a bad thing, though? I've wondered that myself, because I've looked at gold projects like that as well and thought, 500 grams, that's, even though it's over half a meter, if you spread that over 3 meters, you're still at what? You're just shy of 100 grams per meter type of deal. And that is insane. That's still very valuable. So it all comes down in the end to the economics. Can you make it work? Can you make the mining work on a situation like that?
Exactly.
So it's very tricky.
I guess it might be a problem if it's a nuggety type of system with gold, because it's not consistent. You don't know what you're going to be doing. You're going to be taking ore out. Are you going to be able to feed your mill? And all these things come into play. I guess that again, it comes down to, can you make it work? So grade maybe is not the most important thing in all cases. So that, it makes me think. And something else that I recently started paying attention to in the same type of speaking is that I always thought that you should be looking for, when it comes down to gold, for veins that are at least 3 foot wide, I guess. But then there's some scenarios where it could work depending on other things as well, right? You can make smaller veins work too. So is that a thing with uranium? Do you have veins? Do you have width and all these things? Do they come in play?
They typically are veins, but they're a series of veins. And at least in the Athabasca, these deposits are typically quite robust and thick. There's a very good thickness to them, or width, however you want to view it. And so when you're finding a typical Athabasca deposit, if you're not, I guess, on a basement type of deposit, if you're not seeing more than 5 meters consistently, I would be curious about that. I'd be very hesitant on it. And if it's right at the surface or close to it, then maybe that's good. Unconformity type of scenarios can be slightly different, because those are just flat lying bodies. So if you're going down and you're hitting 3 meters or even 4 meters, and start thinking about open pit style scenario, those are definitely much more amenable. But what I've used previously is just that 3 meter mark. That's my basic cutoff. If I'm not seeing things that are greater than 3 meters, then
3 meters, see, not 3 feet.
No, 3 meters, 10 feet.
Okay. I've used 3 feet for gold, so I thought it was about a meter, give or take. That is, but 3 meters with uranium. Okay, fair enough. Maybe this is also important because we're talking about intercepts and width or size of the veins. Might be a good point to stop for a second and talk about the difference between true and apparent width. And because it doesn't necessarily have to do with the width of the veins, but I think it's an important concept. I guess this is also where stuff like the dip of the drill hole would come in and stuff like that. So I guess could you tell me what the difference is between true and apparent width, and explain all the other things that come in play?
Yeah, for sure. That on the geological scale of things, like for core logging geos or anybody putting out press releases, it is hard. It's hard to really determine a true width, because sometimes you've got a structural network that is just all over the place. So how do you really put a true width? But in simplistic terms, if you're drilling an unconformity deposit in the Athabasca Basin, it's going to be flat line, and people are going to drill straight down. So they will always have true widths. If you're drilling in a basement style of deposit, it's going to be angled, could be vertical, can be tilted, can even be flat. So let's assume a tilted deposit like this, and you're drilling down, you drill 90 degrees, you're not going to hit it perpendicular. So you will have a broader width of mineralization than the true thickness. If you angle it this way and go straight down the chute, then you're going to hit 100 meters of whatever it is type of idea. But if you drill perpendicular to it, you will have, let's say, 10 meters of whatever it is. So it makes a big difference. But understanding this, understanding what your deposit is doing, really makes the difference in when you get to a resource stage. Because if you don't have an idea of what that is, you can have a larger looking resource than what is truly there. And that has happened to companies, not just in the uranium space, but in the I've seen it happen in gold, where the modeling was not done properly. They thought the deposit was bigger. They went underground for it. Lo and behold, it's like, where is everything?
Just because because it had a different dip, I guess, or why would that have been?
Just the way things are modeled. So it's it's a lot of factors that come into play. Knowing your structure and what's controlling your mineralization. Now, if you've got a lot of veins, you can have a scenario like this, okay? And it's actually, now let's do it this way. You can have a scenario like this, and you can have tons of veins that are very close together with dead rock in between. And if you're drilling along them, just looks like one massive envelope of homogeneous mineralization, but in reality, there's a lot of dead rock in between. So just weird things like that. You really have to you have to be cognizant of. And then even your drill spacing, if you're drilling 50 meters apart, two holes, you're 50 meters apart, and you're hitting on both those holes. That doesn't necessarily mean that they link up. There could be something in here, like this one might die out right there, and this might pick up right here. So it is very tricky. It is time consuming. It is labor and money intensive to really define these things. But it's worse when you don't do your job properly, and you don't do the due diligence, and you minimize everything. You go down there, like I said, you go down there and make a huge mistake. Like, oh, geez, there's less than we thought.
Okay, I think I'm gonna try and sort of talk about some of the red flags or pitfalls in reading these and what companies might do, their gimmicks and stuff like that. But just sort of to do maybe a review of the basics of the first few things that you look for when you open up a news release. That would be, you're looking for the grade, I guess. Well, why don't you say it? Why don't you sum it up? I guess that's easier.
Yeah, I look for grade and I look for thickness. And then I try to look at the fine details of everything. Depends if we're just sticking with assay results. I tend to look for the dilution factor, and I tend to look for the cutoff. I've seen it more prevalent in gold where there is no cutoff value. And then you said it before earlier about smearing.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen that done in uranium, at least not in the Athabasca. Everyone that I've seen report have done cutoffs. I haven't seen dilution factors in every report. So what that really means is if you've got intersection A, you've got intersection B, and let's say they're both 10%, and then you've got 10 meters of dead rock in between. Are you connecting these two and saying, okay, well, we've got 12 meters of X%, which would be lower than what these intercepts are. Instead of reporting, we've got intersect 1 at this depth, at this grade, and intersect 2 at this depth and this grade. That's a big difference in reporting, because the combined effort looks a lot juicier than the two individuals.
Okay. And I guess there's a bit more specific questions, but does the type of drill that's used really matter for uranium, like between diamond and RC, or is there something else completely that gets used, or what are those differences there?
I've never used RC. I'm very, very familiar with it though. Uh, I know it works in some areas, and you get chip samples out of it, which should be should be representative of what you're drilling. And then they follow it up with downhole gamma probing anyway, so they get a nice profile of what is actually down there that have come out of the hole. I really don't see an issue with that. I think it works well. I would not do it myself, just simply because I like to see the core. I'm far more comfortable when I can see and put everything into perspective. You get your veins and you get your faults, and you're able to see how the style of mineralization is in relation to the rocks around it. You don't get that in RC. It's widely done in Africa. RC drilling is widely employed in Africa. I haven't seen any issues with that either. I think a lot of companies done it very well, and it's been very cost effective. That is one of the big things that I'm obviously envious about, because I'd like to bring my cost per meter down. But to give up the core, that is really tough sell.
Okay, and that's also something to give up the core. That's an interesting thing you mentioned. We're going to get to that just right before we go into those things. There was an interesting question coming from Menachem on Twitter. And it's about ore processing. And well, I guess it's a geological question, right? He says that some ores can be processed with basically with acid, but don't need to be milled before that. So you don't need to bring them to a smaller grain size before you pour acid on top of them. And some other rocks, they do need to be milled into sort of a finer structure before you extract that, before you start extracting. And that's uranium specifically, right? So I guess, first of all, is this an important issue? Like, is this something that I want to pay attention to? And do you necessarily need companies that have the first type of ore where you can just pour the acid and take the uranium out? And second, can I figure that out? Like, can I figure out what type of ore they have by simply reading like drill results or geological news releases?
You should typically be able to figure that out, because really the fundamental difference of what you just described, like from that question, it's ISR, so in situ recovery mining, versus conventional mining, which is either open pit or underground, which you have to mill. There's absolutely no milling involved in ISR. You drill your holes. So you drill your holes, you need your aquatards or clay layers. You have your well that goes down with the acidic fluid, runs through the sandstone formation, which leaches all the loosely coating uranium around the sand grains. And then recovery well takes it all back up, and you've got uranium within your fluids. So there's very easy approach. Anybody who is looking for that type of deposit would probably have that in their news release somehow, maybe even right in the title, an ISR type of deposit or ISL. And so, if the people running the show, I think the people running the show should really be bringing that to into prominence, because those are the most cost-effective uranium mines out there. There's no doubt about that. They have the cheapest operating costs. They can extract lower grades of uranium just because it's that easy to do so. So they're absolutely wonderful deposits. I think there's a lot of good companies out there who are going to do it, especially a lot of good jurisdictions. Obviously, Kazatomprom they're the #1 uranium miners in the world because of that. The States have a lot of good ISL operations, as do Australia. I'm gonna tout one company here, but Boss Energy. I think they've got an amazing deposit at Honeymoon. Geez, man, that's a very sexy deposit, and it's all ISR, so I think it's going to be really good. But compared to conventional mining, you have to mine the ore, you have to blast it, you have to crush it, pull it up to surface, mill it into its finer grain, and then do your processing that way, which is more cost intensive. There's no way around that.
Right. Does the type of acid, does the type of rock that you have in the ground change the type of acid that you have to use on top? Because that's something that I vaguely remember hearing a long while ago, that like it's much cheaper to do ISR in Kazakhstan because they have I don't know if that's true, but so you tell me. But I heard that they have a different type of rock or something, so you can use cheaper acid on top of that or something along those lines. Is that, am I making any sense? I feel like I'm
No,
not making any sense.
you definitely make no. That makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
I don't know if that's the whole reason why it's cheaper in Kazakhstan or not, but calcium. So when you're dealing with anything with acid, calcium eats away your acid, and it poses a problem. And that goes from even to conventional mining. If you've got if your host rock is more calcium rich, so let's say limestone or dullstone, which is calcium magnesium, which makes things even worse, and you're trying to extract uranium out of that, your acid will react more so with the calcium magnesium from the rock, and it will start diluting your acidity that was required to extract uranium. There's even certain type of uranium minerals in deposits that are extremely calcium silicate rich uranium minerals that also require a lot more chemical processing than it would for something that's typically uraninite, which is just U3O8, which is very easy to process.
Mm.
So a lot of different parameters and factors to consider for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, I was just interested in that, just sort of remember that I wanted to ask it about. But let's sort of go on back to the point where I wanted to talk about some of the pitfalls of reading drill results and some ways that you can get got, I guess, because there's a lot of gimmicks that companies in gold specifically. I don't know if it happens too much in uranium. You tell me if it doesn't, but in gold, companies would use, tricks to sort of try and, trick you into believing something that maybe isn't necessarily there or is not as economical, or they would leave out parts of the picture where things could make it absolutely unworkable. So yeah, I want to talk about that. And I think that first and foremost, it's important to target this subject because it seems to me like well, many of us are sort of relaxed around this topic and thinking something like, well, I'm investing in a Canadian company. It's a developed country. The Canadian government is protecting me with the NI 43-101. But the thing is that when companies publish reports that they call compliant with that national instrument, it simply means that they were following the reporting rules of that national instrument. It doesn't mean that you're completely protected and that they're doing everything decently. As opposed to just being completely honest and transparent, which I guess is important. And I learned that not too long ago. So my trust was sort of shaken by that because it's not that necessarily that companies have to do everything just, it's not a one-way street and they can twist it around, even staying compliant with the NI 43-101. And there are many ways in which they can basically do that. So I was thinking of maybe, well, yeah, I mean, let me maybe stop talking here and ask you, is this something that happens a lot with uranium? Like, do companies use those gimmicks, or is this more a gold, silver type of thing?
I haven't really seen it all too much myself, not in the uranium space, but it can happen. People are always trying to come up with gimmicks, and how do you make yourself aware of it? That's where due diligence comes in. I would say go back and you look at the managers in the company, look at their track records and see any of their previous companies. Have they been associated with a number of pump and dumpers? In fact, if they have, then it's hard to change people, really.
Yeah, I guess it might help if we know what some of those things might be. Like in gold, you have equivalent reporting, you have grade smearing and all that type of things. Is there something that could happen in uranium that's specifically uranium? Like, is there a known gimmick?
Well, not a known gimmick, but you just touched on them. Like you can grade smear in uranium if you don't report on any cutoffs or don't report on any internal dilution. Sure, you can smear all that. You can re-drill holes basically, and just not mention them, or you can be a meter away and call it a new hole.
What is a reasonable distance? Because that's a big thing, right? A company could do exactly like maybe you hit a good hole where it's high grade and all that, and now you're sort of news starved and you want to report something. or the market just expects you to keep reporting good grades because you're in the Athabasca Basin and all these things. And so you drill exactly like a meter next to it or 5 meters. But what is a reasonable distance between two holes?
I'd say 20 meters.
20 meters, okay.
But that's by the time you're doing that, and it depends on the deposit that you're drilling. It depends on how continuous things are. But to get into possibly an indicated type of an indicated mineral resource, I would say 20 meters would be a pretty good drill hole distance.
Okay, 20 meters. And what is, you just said continues. What does that mean?
Oh, sorry. No, that was about the deposit. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. If your deposit is continuous and let's say it's, a whole body like that, you can do 20 meters, no problem, be able to piece it together. But if it's more like, basically my fingers, then you will probably need tighter spacing to define that.
Yeah. Oh, okay. And is that something that you could figure out by reading the news release, or do I have to
Probably
ask
not.
the company that, or?
You'd have to ask the company.
Oh, okay. That's not something there's no really a tool that you can see in a news release that you can figure it out.
No, unless they come out with a news release saying that they're doing a resource estimate, and then they would probably come up with a model. And that's as like somebody like me who has seen a number of releases, who's seen a number of resources get put together. Even I would have to go back, and even after reading a resource estimate, I would have to go back and look at some of the pictures to see if things are being done right, and really have build up my comfort blanket, I guess, around what was done.
Because I thought when you said continues, I imagined something else completely. It's something that you would see with gold companies, and then I would assume it happens with uranium companies too, is that companies would lose the drill core, like it would break or something. I'm not sure I completely understand it, but how does that work with uranium? If you lose your drill core, are you still obligated to report that hole? Because I know that you have to report on every hole that you hit. You have to number them. But so let's say you hit 1, 2, 3 and they're all good, but then hole number 4, you lose the core. Do you just skip that hole, or how does that work?
Some companies do. I have seen that done, but I know one thing that I've done internally and continue to do so with baseload is we do report all holes. We report all holes that were lost, regardless of if we hit our target or not. Typically, we would not hit the target. Then you just have to restart. So if we have hole 2, for example, we reported last year, we drilled hole 2. We lost it at a certain depth. I think it was around 100 meters or something. We lost the drill hole. And then we restarted that as hole 2A. And so it all gets reported. There are certain scenarios, and we had this in hole 11 from this year, that we didn't have core recovery in our mineralized zone, of all things. It's like, geez, man, so that's the goods. That's what you need. But we had to disclose that there was core loss in there.
Would you ever go back to something like that? I guess, yeah. Is that money well spent to go back to and re-drill a hole?
When we want to get into tighter spacing, then yes, I wouldn't say re-drill the hole. I would drill it from a different angle to get a better perspective, because we did the downhole gamma probe. So we know that there's a lot of radioactivity in the area. So we would just go back and drill it from a different angle, maybe in a couple of different pierce points we'd be looking at. But yeah, that's how it followed up. There's no, to me, there'd be no point re-drilling that hole. It's already been done. It's given us the information that we need, even though there was core loss. Gamma probe picked it up.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, that's easier for uranium, though. Absolutely. You wouldn't have that with gold. Okay, that's maybe an advantage.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, actually, you remind me of the way that you reported, and I asked you that last time, is that you reported one hole, and I asked you, why did you have to report this hole? And it was pretty much a game changer for you, so that made sense. But it also opened my eyes that a company doesn't necessarily have to report on all the drills that they did all at once. Like you could report on, they don't even have to be continuous. Like you could report on the first hole that you did today, and then report on the 21st in a week or something, and then report the 3, 7, and 19. Right? I mean, that's not necessarily an issue, I guess, from what I found so far. But from what I've also experienced with gold, I guess I can ask you this: when does it become an issue? Like, when is reporting holes just for the sake of reporting holes an issue? Is it a time limit in between? Is it, how should I look at it?
I don't know if it's a time limit or anything, but you have to avoid selective disclosure. So as you mentioned there, with drill holes 1, 5, 7, 17, reporting it like that, that would be selective disclosure, that you don't want to be putting out your best results. We did that with hole, geez, I can't remember now, so long ago. We did that with the hole because it was exactly that. It was a game changer. Nobody's seen that in the Athabasca Basin in decades. Like that was material information immediately, and we really rushed to get that out. We did have holes that had been drilled and were being drilled at that time, but those came out the next week anyway. So again, it really depends on the company. Some companies could sit there and just hold everything off until all of the drilling is done. There's nothing wrong with that, but it depends how long your drill program goes. If you're going for 3 months and you've got no news at all in 3 months.
Yeah. If you're not in a good market in the same time, that's really going to hurt your capital raising capabilities, I guess. And I could, eventually hurt your company. But it's also maybe important to bring up the concept of transparency here, right? Because even if the company is reporting hole by hole, reporting, skipping holes or whatever, it could be fine in a certain scenario if they're being really transparent. If you can read in that news release why they're doing it, there could be some type of a reason. Like, this is not nothing is really what would you call it? Nothing is really a fixed science in this, in the way of analyzing drill results. So obviously geology is a science, much less like physics, but reading the news release is not really a science. So you cannot, there's no laws. Like, you cannot say, oh, the company skipped a hole, that's necessarily a bad company. That's not how it works, especially not if you have a transparent management team that's explaining why they're doing it. That's something that I did like about you. I reached out and I say, hey, what's up? You're reporting one hole, let's talk about it. And you explained to me why it was so important, in human terms. So I guess, some holes are important to report as soon as you get them back from the lab, as you did, right? So I guess it comes down to transparency, right?
Yeah, pretty well. There's one thing to remember though too. If you're doing selective disclosure and you're reporting all your best holes at one point, what does that mean for the rest of the holes?
Yeah,
because you do have to report those. If you put all your best holes out in one release, you're going to wait one news release compared to the other one, and it might not be a good second release.
True. And so you can have an inflated share price that is eventually going to come down, and it's sort of a pumping dumpy type of feeling to the stock that you would have, and that would almost necessarily be a red flag for me not to deal with the management. Also because there's so much choice. As a retail investor, I just have specifically when it comes down to gold and silver, less choice with uranium, but there's still a lot of choice, right? I have a lot of choice. I don't have to put up with that type of reporting if I don't like it, and if it gives me a bad feeling in my mouth, a bad taste in my mouth. But here's also the thing. How do I know for sure, as a non-geologist, how do I know that the hole that you reported is representative of your whole project? Like, how do I know this isn't some anomaly right in the middle of your project and the rest of the land is not as good? Is there a way for me to know if I'm not a geologist?
Look at the maps. You'd have to see where that hole was reported in relation to plan maps or cross sections or anything like that. Otherwise, if there's no way to visually identify where it is or what it was following up, yeah, it's pretty difficult.
What am I looking for when I look at the maps?
Exactly like you said. Where was that hole? Right in the middle of somewhere that they've already drilled?
Okay.
Or was it in a completely new area that they've extended mineralization? Or even, they might have drilled 3 holes here, and the 4th hole could have gone down and still extended mineralization to at depth. So but if they drilled see if I can do this. My fingers don't work that well. If they drill 3 holes like this and then decide, okay, well, we're going to do the 4th hole here like that, then that's really already identified. You're just filling in the gap. At that point, it's just nothing wrong with it. It's just definition drilling by that point, trying to work towards the resource.
Right.
So you'd really have to distinguish what the objectives of the company are. Are they working on an exploration program that has made a discovery and really trying to grow it, or have they already announced a discovery, X amount of years ago or months ago, and are trying to now delineate it into resource? Those are 2 different things.
Or they picked up a worthless project that was drilled like Swiss cheese before that, and now all that they're doing is trying to poke holes just for the sake of poking holes and living a lifestyle. And I guess that's tough to see beforehand. And because I was going to ask you that too. When is a lot of drilling? Like, when is drilling too much drilling? Like let's say a company's been drilling for 10 years. Is that too much? Or is time not an issue? Or is like 500,000 meters? Is that too much? Or does it depend on the size? How do I know that they're doing too much drilling?
Depends on the size, yes. I would definitely say that's a thing. Depends on the amount of years. One way to really feel that out is to look at the drill hole numbers. Now, if you're a drill hole AA 459, that means you put 459 drill holes into this area. And if you still don't have a resource by then, yeah, I would be, my eyebrows would be raised for sure. There's again, that's where due diligence would have to come in. You'd have to follow up the company and find out as much as you can about what they're drilling. If it's a deposit, if it's a discovery, how long has it really been around for? Yeah, that's, what you said was absolutely right. It happens in all commodities. That's one of the things, like, if it didn't go in last cycle, it's probably not going to go in this cycle either. So looking at longevity, and if investors who were around in 2006 are familiar with some of the deposit names, then there's probably a good reason, or I wouldn't say a good reason. There's probably a reason why you're hearing those names again. And it's just as you mentioned. So Rough Rider, Hathor's Rough Rider, that discovery was made in 2008. We drilled it until about 2011. Rio Tinto continued drilling it. I haven't heard anything since. Rio Tinto doesn't have to report on it, but it's a small enough world in this industry that you would hear such things if they decided to go back and start drilling it again, but they haven't. So that's not a bad thing. So if somebody down the road comes back, some junior company comes back and say, hey, look, we're drilling the Rough Rider deposit. Unless the economics have really changed, or unless there's been some massive game changer in mining, that you can mine stuff out at certain depths with ease, then yeah, it's eyebrow raisers.
Well, it comes down to the transparency thing, right? Because if a company picks it up and starts drilling it, I wouldn't necessarily red flag it immediately. I would read a little bit further, because I would be interested in terms of, hey, this went bad last time. I would ask why. Well, I would hope not having to ask. I would hope that the company is going to explain to me immediately in the news release why they're picking something up that has been tried before. And that's also a question that I do ask out of CEOs when I interview them. I would ask them, like, why do you think you're the chosen one that is going to make this thing work when nobody else could make it work before? So, and I think that's a fair game question. Some people don't like it, but
Very fair.
What about so it comes down to the number of holes, it seems, not so much the meters drilled or the time that they've been drilling it, but the number of holes. So what is how many holes on average does it take? Do you know that? Is that available information?
That's another tough one. All deposits are different. It's, I would say, minimum 100.
Minimum of 100. Wow.
Oh, for sure. But again, it depends on your depths and so forth. But well, yeah, I'd say minimum 100.
But Cameco had a big success, like in the what is it? Really early on, like less sub 10, I think, wasn't it? Who am I thinking? Am I thinking about
Yeah,
next
Cigar
gen?
Lake.
Yeah,
I think the Cigar Lake was even discovered on the third hole.
something like that, right? Yeah, it was amazing. But that doesn't
But
happen
after
often, I
that,
imagine.
no, but after that, they put in over 100 holes. On an exploration stage, depends on the size of your project. Like to make a discovery, how many drill holes do you put in to make a discovery? Man, that is really tough because you could have a project with 50 targets viable, and you have to put at least 2 holes into each target. There you go. That's 100 drill holes. Depends on the project size. Some projects might only have 1 or 2 targets. You drill them off in one season very quickly. Boom, done.
Mm.
That's yeah.
How long should that take? Because that's maybe also an indication. Because if you're looking at a company that's been doing a drill program for like 3 years and they're still doing 20 holes, and that's obviously it takes too long. But how long do you think a good drill program takes, or maybe on average per hole, and then we can work it out that way?
Yeah, I don't know per hole, but I was going to say 3 years. Like myself, if I can put about, let's say 20,000, 10 to 20,000 meters into a project on an exploration play looking for a discovery, then I'm happy. But it depends on the depths of those. So if we use baseload as an example, we're drilling down 200 meters. That could buy us 10 drill holes, or it can buy us, well, 10 to 10 drill holes. And that would be, geez, my math is off. No, that's not
If you're drilling 20,000 and so that's going to buy you 100. Yeah.
Yes, my math is way off. All right, yes. So that's
You're a geologist, not a mathematician, so that's fine. You're forgiven.
But I love statistics. Damn it. No, so yeah, it's for me. It would be basically 100 drill holes by 50. You start getting curious because you should try to drill your best targets first. Not always the case. Sometimes logistics weighs out more than anything else. You wanna hit some of your targets that they might rank a little bit lower, but logistically are easier to get to. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But the best return on investment is trying to make a discovery as quick as possible. So you have to do what you can do to get there. That's why I would rather have, myself anyway, I'd rather have geophysical coverage to help us lessen the amount of drill dollars required, because that's the big expensive part.
It's probably some type of a balance thing though that you're looking for, I guess, because you don't want to get that analysis paralysis thing where you're doing geophysics after geophysics and you never get to drilling. You do that for 5 years straight, because eventually you told me last time you got to drill it to know it, right? So you probably want to do a good amount of work before that, but then eventually you do want to get to drilling. So
well, let's go back to Hathor, Rio Tinto, whoever they are now, in the Rough Rider deposit. That was originally owned by Cameco, I guess, when they were SMDC, so not Cameco. But they literally drilled right on top of the deposit. And had they gone another 10 more meters, they would have hit high-grade uranium. But it didn't fit their model, and so they walked away. That was one of the reasons why Hathor was really bullish on it before they even started drilling, because the chemistry in the area was just lighting up. They said, hey, man, this is really good. Let's go put some more drill holes. So the time frame between when SMDC drilled it and when Hathor drilled it was 30 odd years, pretty well, maybe 20 to 30 odd years. So there are certain things worth considering. It's, how many drill holes does it take? And they, how many did they put in there? I think they put in maybe 12 at most, which is not a lot, but that was a very small project in where they drilled, and they drilled a lot of the conductor, but obviously they didn't hit. So you can put 100 drill holes into an area. If you're not drilling the right target, you can miss on every single one. So new ways to imagine things, new geophysical surveys, just a whole different outlook on what you're really looking for can change what you're trying to do with with a project that has X amount of meters already drilled on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I like that you're bringing up sort of history of different projects, because that reminds me of something that I did want to say, is that I would do a history check on the project that I'm going into. I use a website. I don't know if you know it. It's called wise-uranium.org. So wise as in WISE-uranium.org. It's not a great looking website, but if you go on there, you can click per country and all these things. You can basically go to a deposit. You can also look, you can search the website, and you can look for the name of the deposit. But if the name has changed or whatever, you can click on the country, like let's say Canada. This is a new uranium mining project, but you can go to Canada or just North America. There's a map you can click on there as well. Gives you an overview of the project as well as a history in sort of a timeline thingy. So it sort of gives you the headlines of what was happening, as well as a link to those headlines. And some of these things go back to like 1990s and 1990 or 1999. They would explain to you what happened with that deposit, and you would see the names of the companies that used to hold the deposit, and that would give you an idea. You could try and look for their website if it's still existent. You can look up the news releases, or go on to cedar.com, and you can look up the news releases and see what they've been doing on that deposit. And that's some really good due diligence that you can get an idea of, okay, is there something real going on here, or is this just a project that's going to be recycled and sold on to the investors? So that's something that I do.
That is awesome. That's very cool. And that's exactly, I think, what people should do.
Okay. I've also been thinking, we were talking about companies reporting some of these spectacular holes and grades and stuff like that. And I've been pondering so I guess let's be honest here for a second. The junior market specifically is mostly about sales. Also, if I look around the people who got really rich since the 70s, most of them are good salespeople first, and maybe good speculators and geologists or whatever after that, but good salespeople in the first place. And, very few have done a successful discovery, and even fewer have brought something from exploration to production, or have even seen the project that they found brought into production. So in the end, you do want a company that knows how to make its shares attractive to investors. That's important as well. So it's not a one-sided thing, I guess, because what I've been thinking between sort of is that, like, are all marketing efforts bad marketing? And specifically when it comes down to drill results, is the company wrong for trying to give it a good light to the drill results or something like that? Or is the company just supposed to present dry information? Or is it okay if they make an effort to tell the story honestly, but word it more attractively? I don't know if this makes any sense to you, but does it? What do you think about it?
No, that makes sense. And you know what? I agree that there are certain ways that some people will drill. So let's go back to the old analogy here. So you've got a deposit like this, and typically you're supposed to drill perpendicular to it as much as possible to define a resource. I'm the type of guy who has no problems at all, because I like to know sizes of things, to take a drill hole and go right down the guts of it, because you're going to learn a lot of information that way. However, if you know that and you are doing that, you need to disclose that you are drilling down the plunge of the system. You can't just say, oh, we hit this amazing hole and it's absolutely fantastic. And especially if it's never been done like that before, you have to disclose that you're drilling down plunge of the ore system. Which in my world, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It will be your best drill hole, probably. But it's information that is invaluable to the company. I think that's definitely necessary. It helps. In my world, it helps build a stronger resource.
Right. Well, in the end, obviously, you want, because there's a very thin red line, I would assume, that you don't want to cross. Because in the end, you do want to have the good geology, And if you have it, there's nothing wrong with telling the story in an exciting way, I guess. But goes back to transparency and honesty, what we talked about last time, what we've talked a lot about this time. You want the company that's going to be transparent and honest, and is going to cover these things. But it's not, it's not a bad thing, I guess, to try and tell the story excitingly. Just, when you're using hyper, make sure for them to be honest, I guess, and transparent, and explain more in depth what you mean by that. So, yeah.
In my world, transparency goes a long way. But then again, I'm also young and I want to make a very long career in this, and I'm not going to do that by being dishonest and not being a person that people can bank on. So that goes back to something I said earlier about, you got to look at management and see what they're all about.
Exactly. This is a question that I like asking, by the way, to management, that it's easy to lie on, but it actually has the goal of, when they lie to you, you can sort of see, when they answer the question, you can sort of see the way that they answer it in, and the answer is not as important as the way that they answer the question. And I like asking, it's sort of like, I see the world of natural resources having sort of three types of CEOs. One of them is in it for the money. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you tell me that and you explain to me how you're aligned yourself with me, and if you're in there for the money, and I guess you could make it work. But the other type is CEOs who want to build a career, build a name for themselves. It's sort of their calling, or that's what they get fulfillment out of in life. They deem that more important than money. I assume you're one of those CEOs. And then you have a third type that's sort of a combination of both. You have, a young, hungry CEO who wants to make a lot of money, but they're also motivated to make a decent career. And they know that the returns come from compounding your image and compounding your experience in the sector. And you make the most of your money towards the later part of your life. Those are the most rare CEOs, but that's sort of the question that I like asking to CEOs, is like, why are you in this? Which type of CEO are you? But there's no easy way really to judge, to see objectively which type of CEO the person is. So do you think that's accurate?
Yeah, I would say that's very accurate. And yeah, if I had to label myself, I'd be more towards 2 and 3.
Yeah.
I've just survived a bull market, which is absolutely devastating to see what is required in that. So that's why the geology is number one important for me. It's just building up that trust with the investment community, with retail, with institutions. Being somebody that people could rely on is absolutely important to me at these very early stages. I'm actually, I'm not in it for the money, but I will take it when it's there.
Yeah.
So right now, while things are hot, I'm not going to say no to some nice options. I'm not going to say no to a nice salary. If everything goes back down in the dumps again, I would be at that point where I could just sit back and take my foot off the throttle and say, okay, well, we're back in holding mode. But I would have that reputation already built up that I could still live nice and easily.
Exactly.
Reputation is very important for me.
Yeah, I think it's important for everybody. What else in terms of drill results? What else am I missing? Because I think I'm all out of questions here.
One of the hardest parts that I don't think I've seen anybody really do, not in the uranium space, is mineralogy.
Yeah, you told me about that last time. How did I forget to bring it up? Yeah, go ahead.
No worries. Mineralogy goes a long way. And the easier it is to extract your commodity from the host mineral, the better. So with ISRs we've been talking about, it's just little uranium coatings on sand grains, and the acids just wash it away. It's very simplistic. Whereas let's take Elliott Lake, for example. So these are two similar style of deposits, but they're two drastically different. So ISR, you've got micro scale coatings along the sand grains or within the voids of the sand. Over at Elliott Lake, which is my hometown, so I can diss it all I want. That's where I was born and raised, darn it. It's a little bit different. Sure, it's not as porous because it's been solidified, but even if you did assume it to be porous, and I guess it was either Denison or Rio Algam back in the day, they tried to do some underground fracking in a sense and do some block caving in which they would leach solutions through to try and recover the uranium. But that proved problematic. They didn't get nearly any good recovery. I think it was what, 20%, maybe 40 at most. But the difference is the mineral holding the uranium or containing the uranium, let's say it's uraninite, it's basically a nugget. It's like a grain itself. It's not a microscale coating that just goes gone. You have to dissolve that thing, and that takes time. That takes fluids. That takes recirculating your fluids to completely shrink this and shrink it and shrink it and shrink it and shrink it until it's gone. Then you get full recovery out of that. So there are definitely different minerals or different styles of the mineral that will affect what is going to be recoverable and what's not.
And where would I see that as a retail investor? Would I get
probably nowhere? that's one of the things people don't report on. They don't really report on mineralogy until it comes time to an I-43-101.
But can I ask the company that?
Yeah, well, yeah, you can ask them. Whether they can answer that for you, they probably won't be able to.
So what am I asking? Like, what is a...
What's the mineral hosting your uranium? You know,
okay,
is it uraninite? Is it coffinite? Is it uranophane? Carnotite? The whole works.
Okay, what's the mineral that's... okay. This feels like something they should report on. I mean,
in the rare earth industry, that is number one. That's number one criticality, because there are over 100 rare earth bearing minerals. So people can come out and say, "Oh yeah, we've got 20% TREO." Yeah, that's great. But if it's all in allanite or eudialyte, well, I don't even think you can get that much TREO in 100% of those minerals. But you can't extract the rare earths out of those minerals. You just can't. Not economically. It's been proven, tried, tested, true. You know, if the Chinese can't do it, and nobody can.
But I guess that's also where geochronology comes in, right? Because you got the right mineral that's hosting your rock. It has to come from the right time period. And I recently spoke to a geologist. He's a gold geologist, but he told me that geochronology is not as important to do when it comes down to gold, but it's very important for uranium. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that as well.
I would say no, to be very honest. There's a certain point where geochronology is very important in Athabasca, but it is not important to know. So one of the ideas that there were earlier deposits formed in the Athabasca, well, in the basin area prior to the sandstone deposition. So we're talking 2.2 to 1.8 billion years ago.
Okay.
Very old stuff. And then if, they might be underneath where the basin sits nowadays, or even they are incorporated in the mountain belts that were part of the erosion, that, all that material came down and formed the sandstone. So the main mineralized event in the Athabasca Basin, which is where you get all of this unconformity mineralization and even basement hosted mineralization, dates back to about 1.5 billion years ago. The sandstone is about 1.7 billion years old. So there's 200 million years between that. The only problem with age dating things like that is there are a lot of reset events. So because you're relying on lead isotope age dating mostly, any major structural event that remobilizes uranium is going to basically affect your lead isotope ratios. So you're not going to get true accurate estimates anyway. You do get to know that they've been reset, they've been mobilized, so forth. But it's there's a lot of trickiness involved in properly age dating uranium deposits. The key takeaway from, I wouldn't say it's geochronology, it's something that we just call relative age dating, which does not rely on an exact age date. All you're relying on is, do you see this uranium vein in association with everything else? Is it in a massive hematite, which has late veins of chlorite, and then the uranium vein cuts over it, or does the chlorite cut over the uranium vein? Those are things that you want to know, because then you're looking at two different fluid events. And then you can start comparing that to what you see in that area to other areas, and then start building your picture of, okay, well, this is when event number 1 happened with the fluids, number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and so forth.
Okay. I wrote something down that, like, I'm not even sure what was there like 2 billion years ago. There must have been that one big continent. What do you call it? Rodinia?
Yeah,
Something
Rodinia.
like that. Rodinia, yeah. So when it started, when it started going apart, that must have been that big geological event, or not, that you talked about.
I don't want to talk about that because I didn't brush up on the history. To be honest, I just know what happened in one little area. That's all I ever focused on, to know that. But yeah,
that's what you want from a CEO that's working there and putting your money into ground there, though. So that's fair game.
I just have to know what the structures are doing at the time when uranium was mobilized. That's it. Yeah, it's nice to know. It's nice to know what was happening before. Actually, I'll kind of touch back on your whole geochronology and age dating. There are age dates within the Athabasca Basin on a number of different deposits that all range from 1.5 billion years. Actually, some are even older, to about that 1.8 billion years. Most of them are around that 1.5. There are quite a number at 1.2, 700, 500 million years ago, 350 million years ago. So there's no one discrete age. A lot of the ages, the academics have kind of linked up to far field events. So yeah, as you mentioned, Kay, you got Rodinia, builds up, boom, mountain built, then everything spreads apart, and then it all comes back and creates another mountain vent hundreds of millions of years later. Well, that's called far field event, far field stress, basically. So here's your continent that has the Athabasca Basin right in the middle, and then your next big mountain or supercontinent event is going to build mountains on this side or on this side. And so your continent grows, but as that's happening, it's applying stresses along this area. So they are mobilizing again and moving uranium. So the fluids become active again, and the structures become active. Then it all breaks apart, along the edges, because this is now a stable craton. But then it happens again. Supercontinent comes along again, and then you get more things build up, and then that still creates that. So that's one of the leading ideas why there are so many different age states in the Athabasca Basin for uranium mineralization.
Okay, that's a good overview. Probably goes deeper than what I expected to. Yeah, James, I think I'm all out of questions. What else? Is there something important that I'm missing? So we did mineralogy. That was an important one. What else?
I honestly don't know. As far as exploration, yeah, the big things. What are the grades? What are the drill hole thicknesses? And from there, just follow the company. Do your due diligence. If you like the company, if you like the management, if you like the results, take the chance. It's exploration. If you're afraid of investing into a high risk market, then don't. Go to the producers. Go to the guys who are near term turning on the production valves. Get into your Camecos, get into your UR Energies and your Energy Fuels, and even your Boss. Get into companies like that. I think they're all going to be hugely successful in this next in this coming bull market. But if you like the companies, if you want the high risk rewards, get into the exploration game. Don't be afraid to contact the CEO. They'll either answer you or have somebody else, or just completely ignore you, which would be unfortunate.
Which would, for me, would most of the times mean just don't touch it. Because if it's a CEO of a sub $100 million company, they most definitely have the second to answer your email, from what I found so far. So if they're not, I mean, not in the middle of the drill program. It could take a while, but if they're not answering your emails, that's a big thing as well. So
Yeah, but it can't hurt to try and get some additional information that you can't gain off the website or a presentation or in previous news releases. As you mentioned, go to SIDAR, dig deeper if you need to. And it's really a bit, as far as mineralogy goes and things like that, the whole economics, those all come much later. Those come after deposits are discovered and really delineated, and just trying to prove up that they can go forward. I as baseload goes, I do try to be very promotional on that front, saying that, hey, look, we've got the possibilities of an economically looking deposit by talking about the grades, as I did earlier, 0.2% not being something that should be shunned. And by putting out news releases very early on that we've hit mineralization at 35 meters beneath the surface. Yes, they're all promotional, but they're all very they're all game-changing aspects of things that are reminiscent of previous mined deposits in the Athabasca. So that's why I do it. Whereas these ones that are in the sandstone at 300 meters or 500 meters deep, whether even if they've got 5% U3O8 or 10% U3O8, the comparative scenarios with deposits like those don't go into mining. So just trying to differentiate ourselves, not a bad thing. Not trying to be shisty, just trying to show that what we've got has a lot of characteristics that are similar to previous mine deposits.
Yep. Yeah. I also like that about the company, if I'm being honest. And also, I was just thinking as to what else we might want to talk about. I was looking at the clock. We've been at this for over an hour. So tell you what, if there's someone watching and they have any questions, I'm almost sure that you would be willing to come back on when I have enough questions for you and talk about it, whether it be baseload related or uranium geology related. I think you'd be willing to come back. So if there's any questions, please post them in the comments.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to come back.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you for investing your time in me, and hopefully speak soon.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Antonio.